Here we are in the Mental Insights podcast with Dr. Eric Kuelker, and we have some exciting information to speak about within the mental health field, which we'll speak about more in the beginning and will transfer into more of how Dr. Eric Kuelker's research has really brought in a lot of information within the mental health field and how we can categorize and evaluate mental health conditions within what people are facing today. So there's the big phenomenon between the relation between physical health and mental health, and really the characterization of an injury within both fields. So the major research that you're doing is within psychological injuries and the ways that we can evaluate and really diagnose what you've been experiencing and what you've went throughout, whether it's your childhood or your adulthood. Could you explain what the psychological injury model is so our audience can get a good briefing in terms of what we're going to dive into throughout this episode?
Sure. Thanks, Brendan. And the psychological injury model says that the single biggest cause of nearly all mental health problems is when people experience a psychological injury. And a psychological injury is characterized by somebody experiencing a very frightening or traumatic event, or they're treated with deep disrespect, or they're emotionally neglected by their caregivers, especially their parents. And that those are psychological injuries. And there's four major categories of psychological injuries. The first one is traumatic or emotionally neglected experiences in childhood. The second one is working for a toxic boss. The third one is traumatic events in adulthood. And the final one is highly stressful life events. And there's a variety of those. For example, if you're in a close business relationship and you discover that your business partner has enormously cheated you, then that can be a serious psychological injury because you really trusted that person and then they betrayed that trust. Now, the psychological injury model says there's other causes of mental health problems. For example, postpartum depression. It's very real. And, so these hormonal changes can trigger off episodes of depression. However, it says the single largest cause of mental health problems is psychological injury. And so with that as the foundation, that's what causes mental health problems. It then says that one of the best interventions is psychotherapy, because psychotherapy is really designed to heal psychological injuries. I mean, fundamentally, people heal people. And when the person experiences psychotherapy, then that's what really facilitates their healing. And then also, the psychological injury model says there needs to be a brand new way of assessing people. And that first and foremost, we should ask, well, hey, what happened to you? What are the different psychological injuries that you've experienced? What are the life events that you've had? And how did you cope with these painful life events? And so that's why I created the psychological injury index for people to be able to download it, fill it in, and that way they can really look at, these are all the different types of psychological injuries that I've experienced. And that's why I might be feeling really depressed or highly anxious or have very odd experiences. So that's just a quick overview. There's a lot to pack in, to unpack from the model, and that's what we can get to next.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Eric. And we'll definitely be able to, dive deeper into the specific parts within the model, but I think that gives it a good framework. And, just to offer, I think, the other side of things in terms of what I think a lot of society sees mental health today is, the flip side of what you're speaking about in terms of when I was younger and when I heard of the terms of, a mental health condition such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, they were all instances that I always heard within the comparison of having a chemical imbalance, having something hormonal, like you were saying, that changes the way that their brain perceives, acts, and, goes throughout your day. It changes the way that your body, your mind can interact within other people. And that was really kind of the focal point of what I heard was to be, what people categorize as a mental illness, which I have been, learning throughout a lot of my conversations shouldn't necessarily be the term that you call it. A lot of times I've been calling it a mental health condition because it seems like the way that we speak about what someone is going through has a big part because it can trigger different experiences that they had originally, or it can characterize them as, a lot of people see someone who has a mental condition as, crazy or insane. They categorize these terms with them, which necessarily isn't true when, like you're saying, it's an experience that they had that they might not have become aware of or faced, and they haven't really gone through a psychotherapy session or even thought about, what kind of experience they might have had within their childhood. So the chemical imbalance is a topic that I think has been thrown, left and right, and there hasn't been really a great conversation as to, how this has been diagnosed and what's going on within that field. So it's interesting. Once I read your article within Mad in America, it really opened up my eyes in terms of the way that we should begin to evaluate mental health and what people are going through. And I'll make sure to have the link towards your article and as well to the psychological injury index so people can become aware of that, and another way to approach how you see the experiences and conditions that you go through. Because nowadays, the best way that people are going through evaluating their own mental health through therapy sessions is through things such as the DSM and different ways that they characterize, what you're going through. So it's the psychological injury index is a new way that we're approaching this. But in terms of what, the Society of Mental Health is seeing it as it now, can you speak about the chemical imbalance, phenomenon, and, why is this something that the mental health field is really still driving today? And, the offer that medication is the only way that someone can change those, hormones such as serotonin, dopamine, and those endorphin levels that we can try to boost. So can you speak about, that topic?
Sure. The single most important thing to realize about the chemical imbalance theory is that there is not one single solid scientific article consistently showing that people with depression have substantially lower levels of serotonin than people with normal mood. And there's no evidence anywhere, solid, clear evidence, that anybody has a chemical imbalance of any sort. And the reason I know this is because, Brandon, actually, I'm a really boring guy. I stay home Saturday nights. I read the psychiatry journals. And other people like you get invited out to interesting parties and you meet cool people, but not me. I stay home, I read psychiatry journals. There's not one single solid research article. I defy anybody to come up with a research article that shows that people with depression have consistently lower levels of serotonin than people who do not have depression, and that this difference in serotonin levels, even if you can measure them, which you can't, that this difference is not due to psychological injuries. So they have found various changes in serotonin transport genes, but when they look at, oh wow, is there a serotonin transporter gene abnormality, or, how does that link up to psychological injuries, what they find is that the evidence for a deficiency in the serotonin transporter gene is really wobbly, but what stands out really strong and clear is that the more psychological injuries that people have, the more depressed they are, or the more anxious they are. And so there's no solid evidence. So you might be wondering, by golly, how on earth did a concept that doesn't have a single solid scientific article to back it up get spread out so incredibly widely in our society? And the reason is because the cause of a theory, or the cause of a problem, determines the solution, right? So, if you think that your mental health problems are caused by chemical imbalances, then the solution that you have to take is to take a pill to correct the chemical imbalance. You have to take a pill. And the drug companies came up with the idea of chemical imbalance, or they at least, enormously popularized it. Zoloft ran these commercials, and they paid psychiatrists enormous sums of money to spread this concept around. And so a great many psychiatrists have consulting contracts with the drug companies. For example, in 2008, there was about 273 speakers at the American Psychiatric Association convention, right? So these are the people, all these psychiatrists show up at the American Psychiatric Association convention, and these are the speakers, and telling the psychiatrists this is what the truth is. On average, every speaker had financial links to 5 different drug companies. Every single speaker on average was paid by 5 different drug companies. So guess what they're going to talk about? They're going to talk about chemical imbalances, because that's what sells pills. But if they were to say, guys, there's not a single research article supporting the idea of a chemical imbalance. Actually, psychological injuries are the single biggest cause of mental health problems. Well, they've just talked themselves out of a job. And actually, they've signed promotional contracts. If they don't promote the drugs, they can be sued by the drug companies. So, I don't know, if your idea of a bad time is to be sued by a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but I'm sure the psychiatrists don't like that idea. So it's a mix of, expert opinion through the psychiatrists, drug company advertising, and then various organizations. They get money from the drug companies. They push this idea. Magazine advertisements saying that some researchers believe depression is due to a chemical imbalance. The magazine advertisements say, however, these researchers have not, been able to produce a single study. They just say the researchers believe it. So this chemical imbalance theory has gotten very widely diffused through society. And it just, in 50 years, we'll look back and go, how did an idea with no scientific backing get such widespread acceptance? So and you're right, the implication is that it's not just it's not just depression, it's bipolar disorder, it's schizophrenia. So let's look closely at a bit of the research. Here in Canada, they asked 23,400 Canadians about their experiences in childhood and their mental health. Okay, so this was a huge study. Every Canadian had an equal chance of getting picked. And they asked these Canadians, were you ever physically abused, sexually abused, or was there violence between your parents? So they asked about 3 different, psychological injuries that happen in childhood. There's generally 10 psychological injuries that are asked about, but the Canadians asked about physical abuse, sexual abuse, and violence between your parents. So the people who had no psychological injuries, their base rate of getting bipolar disorder was set at 1. But if you had just 1 psychological injury, you were 2.5 times more likely to have bipolar disorder. If you had 2 psychological injuries, you were about 4.5 times more likely to develop bipolar disorder. If you had all 3 psychological injuries, if you're physically abused, sexually abused, and there's violence between your parents when you were under the age of 18, you were 8 times more likely to develop bipolar disorder. So that shows what bipolar disorder really is. The single largest cause of bipolar disorder is people who have experienced multiple traumas in childhood, and they have serious difficulty regulating their emotions as a result of that. And they frequently slip into dark depression. Occasionally they go into a manic high. That's what bipolar disorder fundamentally is. Now, it's true. Some people grow up in emotionally healthy homes and they develop bipolar disorder as well, okay? I want to be very picky about this. The psychological injury model doesn't say every single mental health problem is due to psychological injuries. There are some people who grow up in emotionally healthy homes and do develop serious mental health problems, but they're in the minority. Schizophrenia, the exact same thing. And researchers in the US and in the United Kingdom, they found that if people had 5 psychological injuries, they were anywhere from 63 to 150 times more likely to develop schizophrenia. So it's not a shortage of dopamine or an excess of dopamine at all. It's fundamentally that people have multiple psychological injuries, and as a result of these multiple psychological injuries, they have serious difficulty with their emotions. They have difficulty connecting with reality and distinguishing what is reality and what is fiction. And they have unusual experiences, such as hearing voices. And when I work with people who are labeled as bipolar disorder, or when I work with people, who had the label schizophrenia stuck on them, guess what I find? Exactly what the research says, right? And all the patients I've worked with who, somebody else labeled as bipolar, lo and behold, they were physically abused, they were sexually abused, dad beat mom up. And now they have serious difficulty regulating their emotions, and at times they just crash into severe depression, and occasionally their emotions spike wildly, but it's overwhelmingly the result of multiple psychological injuries that they have all these difficulties. So then some people will say, well, by golly, the medications help people. And however, and therefore there must be a chemical imbalance because the medications alter the brain. Well, it's very important to realize psychotherapy helps people, right? Are you going to then say that, it's a psychotherapy imbalance? And exercise helps people. So if people engage in, routine, fairly brisk exercise, that does help with depression. And actually, placebos help people. So, if people take a sugar pill to treat their depression, lots of them get better. So, in fact, when they study depression, the Hamilton rating scale for depression is a 53-point scale, okay? And people show up and they're either given placebo or an active pill. They're measured on this 53-point scale. They're followed up for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks. And they find that the difference between the placebo and the active pill is, on a 53-point scale, 1.97 points. So the placebo helps almost as many people as the active pill. So if you're going to say, well, it's chemical imbalance because the active pills help people, well, you can say, well, nothing helps people, right? The placebo helps people. It's this hope. And hope is an incredibly powerful antidepressant, right? And this brings me to the final point that I want to make, is that when they look at the sense of teamwork that people have with their psychiatrist, they found that if you perceived your psychiatrist as cold and arrogant and distant, and he gave you an active pill, there was some improvement. But if you perceived your psychiatrist as warm and caring and interested in helping you, and they gave you a placebo, right? You got a completely useless thing from a warm, caring psychiatrist, you did better than when you got the active pill from the cold, distant, uninvolved psychiatrist. So that shows that people help people, people heal people. And this is something that psychiatrists don't like to talk about at all, that who gives the pill? If they're warm and caring and they, are genuinely conveyed to the person that I want to help you, they get better results if they give the person a dummy pill than if they're cold and arrogant, they give the person an active pill. So that really shows that, this line of evidence that, well, the pills help people. It's not true. Lots of things help people with depression or anxiety. And then secondly, that people heal people. It's the sense of teamwork is more important than what you get. So that's just a quick overview that there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance. It's been heavily pushed by the drug companies. That's why you believe it. And that the lines of evidence to support this concept just aren't there. And that what really helps people with depression is a sense of teamwork that they feel with whoever is working with them.
That's great, Eric. Thank you for that, and thank you for the research that you provided. It's so important to bring about this topic because it's something that I think is very misconstrued within the mental health field today, where you see these commercials online, these ads, everything, and the first step is, if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you're bipolar, if you're going through these issues, this drug is going to help you. And like you're saying, it shows how it's very driven by the drug companies, and it filters down into mental health professionals, which is very interesting to say the least, because even today within mental health professionals, we do have, say, a lack of, just even, availability for people to seek out the help. Within the US, I know that we're really severely lacking within having mental health professionals for people to reach out. I believe, it's maybe somewhere to like 1-to-5 ratio in terms of patients to actual professionals available to seek out help. And if we're focusing on this theory that we're going through, most of the professionals are offering drugs and you're being prescribed medication rather than going through this process of the one-on-one. And throughout a lot of people around me, they've been going to therapists that necessarily aren't the warm, kind, very helpful ones that will be there for you and really be ones that are going to be the, it's a two-way road within that session, which I think, really needs to start to gain ground, because if our first result is to just medicate people, then we're really seeking out the wrong terms, because the studies that you have brought out clearly show that it's more about people helping people rather than the medication. It's such an important thing to speak about, because relationships, I think, are so vital and so important. When you speak about trauma of what somebody is healing with, within a lot of the different models that you speak about within the psychological injury model, it's all about personal connection. It's all about relationships. So through a traumatic experience, it's necessarily going to be through someone else. It's not going to be just you harming yourself. So it's all about these interpersonal relationships that we have with others. And it's, knowing how to cope and manage our emotions, which I think is so important. Because for myself, I was within, that category of having a great childhood. I had a fantastic set of parents, family. I was brought up in a great environment. but I didn't know how to cope with my emotions. I didn't know how to deal with what I was brought to the table. And through traumatic experiences brought me to, years of just emotional neglect. And I really brought myself to places that I never want to be again. I was in dark thought patterns. I was using substances in order to suppress a lot of the pain, which shows you that, we need to have these connections. We need to have these resources for people to know that, you need to work on your emotions. And emotional intelligence is something that I've truly been trying to focus on, throughout my everyday is, whether it's through journaling, whether it's through speaking with someone, learning how to manage and cope with your emotions, whether it's something that was a traumatic experience or whether it's something that brought you joy, you still need to know how to, understand the benefits and how it's affecting you, how the environments are playing, which I think is not really brought about to a lot of even children today. As you see more when you get older, emotions obviously come more into play, but even on the male spectrum, men do not have the, better ability to, manage their emotions compared to women today. And it's definitely something that we need to focus on, not only with men, but with children. There's a lot of different rooms for improvement that we need to go throughout this process, because as I've been, researching and speaking with people, childhood trauma definitely is a big proponent for a lot of psychological injuries today. It's something that a lot of people around me have faced, and it's something that I don't think is thought about as much as it should be. And, it's kind of brought to the terms that someone just doesn't know how to deal with their emotions, and it's not actually brought back to the terms that they went through a traumatic experience, which is really what's causing their behaviors. And that's what I think I've started to uncover a lot within my own life is I've seen that different experiences throughout my past have directly reflected into how my behaviors are throughout, 10, 15 years later. And without having that sense of reflection and awareness of what I went through, I could be going down 20 years later and still having these behaviors that I was never even aware about. And I think those questions, those, reflections need to be something that's truly important for everybody as they go throughout their life, because it can change the way that you live in your everyday, how you interact with people. And it's definitely something of value that I think therapy can bring to the table. When I speak with people, I always say, therapy is for everybody. No matter if you had a psychological injury or not, it can offer an awareness and a reflection to, how you can move forward within your life, because not a lot of people can bring about these self-reflective questions on their own. And it's something that, you need the guidance, you need the one-on-one availability with people to do that, which some people always do with, a lot of coaching today. There's other forms of that, but having the mental health professional, I think, is truly important for one to focus on. And, I want to touch on the, in terms of the chemical imbalance, in terms of the endorphin levels. You spoke about exercise and therapy, that the relationships with someone else can really offer those boosts of different serotonin levels. Is there any other, natural pathways or techniques that someone can, boost some of their levels? I know, if you're under sunlight, the vitamin D helps boost some of those levels, so it can offer, a change in mood. Is there any specific, techniques that you offer or different activities that you see best for someone to do to change within their lifestyle that, can benefit within their own lifestyle? Because something that I've learned is a lot of people will just take medication, and it's not going to be, the one size fits all. It's everything's got to be connected together. So, you have to go through therapy, but as well change your lifestyle. So you can't just go through therapy and talk through it, but then still be in a bad environment, still have a relationship with someone who's, harmful to you, or, you can't still be eating processed foods from, all of these fast food companies. So, what are some ways that you see within your clients to change their lifestyle to, better improve the way that they're, whether it's their serotonin and dopamine levels, or whether it's just their lifestyle changes that they can bring an improvement to their life?
Sure. Yeah. And I just want to emphasize, there's no evidence that people have altered serotonin or dopamine levels. That's part of the chemical imbalance myth, right? Now, there are lots of things that I recommend my clients do. The first one is a program of, at least 3 times a week, getting pretty brisk exercise, because that's always helpful. And, for multiple reasons. First of all, you're actually doing something. You're literally taking a step. And so often at the end of sessions, clients say, so what's a step I can do? What's the next step? And I literally say, yeah, that's it precisely. 10 or 12,000 of them at a brisk pace. And so 3 times a week doing that. And then lots of common sense stuff, go to bed at night and get up with the natural rhythms of day or night. Go to bed at 10:30, get up at 6. But if you go to bed at 3 in the morning and you get up at noon, your body is wildly out of alignment with the natural rhythms of day and night. And the only reason we can do that is in the last 75 years, electric lights became widely available, right? But 150 years ago, nobody was staying up late. Candles were ripping expensive, right? For tens of thousands of years, the sun went down, all our super great grandparents went to bed. Oh, go to bed, right? And, don't look at the alarm clock and get your brain churning. 20,000 years ago, our super great grandparents weren't looking at the alarm clock, right? 2,000 years ago, the Egyptians would be looking at the sundial. Well, you can see how well that works at 3 in the morning. So, and you're totally right, eating lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, anything that's hyper processed, artificial. The fundamental question that I look at is this what our super great grandparents were doing? Well, right? Well, our super great grandparents went to bed when the sun went down. They ate lots of fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. And they walked around an awful lot. They didn't take a lot of chemicals in their body. I'm not going to get super specific, but these are some of the things that people can do. And then the second major topic that I want to touch on is that there's multiple paths to healing. I'm not going to say there's only one, right? Because all these lifestyle changes, they are helpful. I really encourage my clients to do them. Also getting involved in groups, because we live very isolated lives. And so I also encourage clients to volunteer. And because then they're involved with a group that's, working towards a common cause that's pro-social. And I don't care if it is cleaning garbage out of streams so that we have clean streams, or if it's the SPCA or the Boys and Girls Club or something like that. We lead very isolated lives, and there's extremely strong research. The more socially disconnected we are, the more lonely we are, the worse our mental health is. And so I've got clients who say that they sing in a choir, and this choir is their extended family. So that's another thing that I encourage people to do is if there's groups that are pro-social and the tone is generally positive, that can be quite helpful for them. And then one of the reasons that therapy is unique is because therapy has the opposite dynamic to what caused the psychological injury in the first place, right? So years earlier, the perpetrator was not did not respect the victim, right? Say the swimming coach. The swimming coach just totally didn't respect the victim. They disrespected the victim. And the swimming coach was totally focused on their own evil desires of, sexual gratification. They had zero interest in the victim's plans or goals. And also this swimming coach put and shoved their agenda on the victim, right? It's sort of like, we're going to do this regardless of what you think, and I'm going to scare you to comply with me. And it's the exact same dynamic, right? Suppose somebody has a very angry parent. The angry parent doesn't care about how the child feels. They're just blowing up. The angry parent doesn't care about the child's goals. They just are focused on their goal of venting their rage. And the angry parent doesn't ask the child, hey, I'm feeling really upset now. Do you mind if I scream at you and call you obscenities? Or would you prefer that I go into another room and, punch a pillow, right? So what therapy does is the exact opposite. Therapy looks at helping the person feel heard and respected and understood, right? A good therapist, a good counselor, psychologist really wants to hear what's the client's story, and respecting what the client says and valuing it. Also, the second thing is that the good therapist is working on the client's goals. They say to the client, what do you want to work on in our session today? Or they'll say, early in our sessions, you said one of your goals was X, learning how to have better relationships with your siblings. Do you want to work on that today? So a good therapist is focused. What are the client's goals? How can I help the client achieve the goals? Their goals. And then finally, the good therapist will check in and say, hey, does this approach make sense? Because some clients, they really click well with certain approaches. And I've had other clients where I tried the same approach on them. And they go, no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. So, and the therapist says, that's fine. There's other tools in the toolbox. And, the goal. So at each point, the therapist helps the client feel heard and respected. The therapist says, what are your goals? Let's work towards your goals. And finally, does this approach make sense? Are we working at a pace that's comfortable for you? And it's the exact opposite of the dynamics that cause the psychological injury. And for that reason, one of the things I really encourage people to do is when they're seeking out a therapist, look for a therapist who measures. Is the client getting better? So, and a quick scale of the client's level of psychological distress at the beginning of every session. And then also the client's rating of the sense of teamwork that they have with the therapist, right? And that, because the sense of teamwork, remember, Brendan, people heal people. And the sense of teamwork that the client feels to the psychologist, that's the single most important factor, right? It doesn't matter so much which technique is used or that sort of thing. It's the client's sense of teamwork that they experience to the psychologist. And that's why in every session I ask clients, hey, can you fill in the scale? Give me feedback. What's a sense of teamwork? And so that I know how to tweak it and improve it for our next session. And if I mess something up, because I'm just a flawed human being, then the client can indicate that. And it can go, wow, that's really helpful feedback. Thank you for telling me this. And so a couple of weeks ago, I met with a client. Of course, I always change details when I tell client stories. And they said, remember to ask me about the Camaro story. Ask me about the Camaros. Okay. So it was very important. And so, right at the beginning of the next session, I said, we met together last time. And at the end, you said you really wanted me to ask you about the Camaro. Can you tell me about that experience with the car? They said, yes. Right. So this is, I'm always checking in with clients. What's your sense of teamwork with me? Are we working well together? What can I do to improve our teamwork? How can I support you reaching your goals? Do you really feel that I hear and respect you? Is my approach working? And because that's the exact opposite of how they received the psychological injury in the first place. And so that's why therapy is uniquely positioned to be helpful. I mean, there's other things that are that bring healing, and I certainly want to encourage people to seek them out. But that's why therapy is uniquely positioned to be helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Eric. You offered some great insights into therapy and just the importance of community and the relationships that we have. It's great that you speak about just it's the complete change of from the traumatic relationship and then bringing a healing aspect in terms of how you're able to interact with a person and share your experiences and share how you're going through your life and where you want to improve. I think the ability to ask questions is a great way in order to, bring out how someone can improve, because you're leading them to the answers rather than telling them, which is definitely something that I've learned is truly important, and how to, benefit oneself and learn how you can improve yourself on your own rather than always having to have a person, lead you to that answer. And then you spoke about, the communication aspects and how you're able to, go through the relationship with someone in a therapy session, which is definitely so important. You spoke about how really it's the two-way street, and I love that you spoke about the ability to measure after, each session. I think that's something that definitely isn't approachable in all measures of, any mental health professional. So definitely I hope that everybody in the audience will listen to that piece of advice duly, because that can offer, I think, definitely a great value for someone. And I think being able to measure each session and seeing if you are improving rather than just, sharing each session. You could go through 2 or 3 sessions and realize that a therapist is not the best for you. I've had many people try 3 to 5 therapists and still not being able to find who is best for them. Many people that I've spoken with and who have gone through therapy, including myself, has not seen that measurable aspect of a session, which I'm glad that you're bringing to the table, because that's something that I think can really help someone and yourself, on both sides of the relationship. You're seeing what's truly going on throughout each session and understanding more about how you're helping out each other. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because it really has to be an improvement each session. Even if you didn't make a forward progress, it's all about the learning experience. It's all about, having something tangible to know and to use to move forward, through each session with the client. I spoke a little bit about the concept of, a past traumatic experience affecting the thoughts, actions, and behaviors down the road. Could you speak more about how that or such a traumatic experience can affect your, thoughts and behaviors down the line? And what are ways that you're able to work with clients in order to, become aware of why that change is happening, and maybe how to, get rid of or face that experience in order to change those behaviors or thought patterns?
Sure. An excellent example is I was working with one guy, and he told me that when he was 9 years old, he found a pack of cigarettes, and he went out in the woods behind his house, and he did what any 9-year-old boy does when they find half a pack of cigarettes. He decided to light one up, right? And however, older man came along, sexually abused him, and then left him. And I said, wow, that's awful. And the client said, well, I deserved that. I'm like, what? But no, you were sexually abused. You didn't deserve that. And he said, no, I deserved it. I found a pack of cigarettes. I did what I should not have done. I smoked cigarettes, and so I deserved it. And that's a perfect example of how trauma can create very dysfunctional thoughts. Because what happens is that when children, the way that we raise our children is we say, if you do this bad behavior, then you get this bad consequence, right? So if you hit your sister one more time, then you get a timeout and you have to sit in the timeout chair for 3 minutes, right? Or if you, steal your brother's chocolate cake, then you don't get any more screens for the day. So we raise children this way. It's very ordinary. It's very normal. And so children think, if I do a bad action, then a bad event will happen to me. And what happens with sexual abuse is this really horrible, big, bad event happens, and the child reasons backwards. I must have done something really horrible, awful, bad. I am extremely guilty, right? And so that's why one of the tragedies of people who've been sexually abused is they feel so dirty and they feel so filthy inside. And that's exactly what happened with my client, is they felt so dirty and filthy from being sexually abused. They had done something wrong. They'd smoked cigarettes when they'd been told not to, but they therefore thought, hey, I got what I deserved. They never questioned that belief. Very smart, hardworking person. They had never questioned that belief. It only popped up, I don't know, 11 or 14 months into therapy that this popped out. And like, wow. And so I said to the client, okay, you had kids. And I said, yeah. And I said, did you ever catch them smoking? And yeah, my son, found some a cigar and smoked it when he was 13. I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I sat him down and make him smoke the entire cigar all the way down to the stub. And he threw up and he felt totally gross. And then I talked to him, see, smoking does bad things to your body. Don't smoke again. And you're grounded for 3 days. So, okay. So you caught your 13-year-old son smoking. You made him smoke the entire thing. He felt totally gross. He threw up. You guys had a talk and you grounded him for 3 days. He says, yep. I said, okay, now this is, a decade later. Do you think that the consequence you gave to your son for smoking was correct? He goes, yeah, I think it was. I'm like, okay, sure. 3 days of grounding, vivid way for him to learn that smoking totally does bad things to your body. And that's it. He said, so if that was the appropriate consequence for you, that you gave to your son, how was it appropriate for you to be sexually abused by a homosexual pedophile when you were 9? And all of a sudden he went, and all this false belief just snapped right off, which was a really cool moment, right? Because a lot of that false guilt and shame just, snapped off in that instant. One of these really gratifying things about being a psychologist is watching people change right in front of your eyes. It might be, dramatic like that one, or it might be incremental. And he had never questioned that belief. It just was the grand truth of the universe. It was only 11 months into therapy that this event emerged and this belief emerged, and we were able to address it. So, and then also with clients, their behaviors, right? And one of the things that I really want to change is the labels we put on people, like addict or junkie. I think that's awful, right? Because the research is crystal clear. Remember the study of Canadians? If they had all 3 traumas, if they're physically abused, sexually abused, violence between their parents, they were 11 times more likely to abuse substances than somebody who grew up in an emotionally healthy home. So, what is completely correct to think about people who have problems abusing substances is that these are people with multiple psychological injuries who have dysfunctional ways of coping with their psychological injuries. So first of all, they're people, right? They're people. They're not addicts or junkies. They're not human garbage. They're people. We need to respect them as people, right? They came out of the womb bright and, clean and shiny and pink like every other baby. They're totally innocent. And they were the victims of these psychological injuries. They're people. And they experience psychological injuries, multiple ones. Because overwhelmingly people turn to substances because of psychological injuries. And it's a dysfunctional way of coping. So they're like, oh, okay, well, and when I work with people with substance abuse problems, I always talk about, okay, what were you feeling right before you called your dealer for cocaine? And they said, well, I was feeling lonely, or I was feeling scared, or I was angry, or I was hurt. And then I called the dealer. I said, oh, okay. There's nothing wrong with your feelings, of fear and anger or hurt. The problem is that you turn to cocaine as a way to medicate that. And let's look at different ways of helping you to deal with your emotions, with these strong negative emotions. It's not surprising you have such strong negative emotions. Look at all the trauma you went through. Let's figure out healthy ways. And so as we figure out healthier ways of dealing with their strong negative emotions, then they come in a couple months later and they say, doc, I was feeling really angry at my girlfriend because she did blah, blah, blah. And I had such a craving to use cocaine. But I thought about what we talked about, and I went through the list on my smartphone of alternate ways of dealing with negative emotion. And I phoned my sister up and I said, sis, I just want to talk to a normal person. And we talked, and, I felt better. And then I figured out what to say to my girlfriend, and we worked through the conflict, and everything was good. Like, that's awesome. And they said, yeah, I didn't relapse at all. And you see, once they understand it, the substance is not fundamentally the problem. The negative emotions and people's multiple childhood psychological injuries, they have lots of negative emotions. The negative emotions is the issue. And, what do you do with it? Do you deal with them in a healthy way or a dysfunctional way? And that then helps people to realize, oh, if I learn alternate ways of dealing with my strong negative emotions, then there's another pathway for me in life. And I don't have to go back to cocaine or alcohol or, binge eating or whatever my coping mechanism is. I can have a much better path in life.
That's great. I'm glad you brought that up in terms of ways to cope with emotions and handle them effectively through, when you're going through these negative emotions such as anger, sadness, loneliness, which brings into, a bigger topic that includes that I want to speak about is, when someone goes through, whether it's they're abusing substances or whether they had a traumatic experience, how are you able to effectively help them change their environment, their relationships, their thought patterns to, know not to think negatively that they were the cause of their problem or that they need to seek out substances to, effectively cope with their pain? So how are you able to help them and lead them to ways to change their environment? Because I know a lot of people that have gone through rehab through substances, but once they go right back to the same environment, they necessarily won't change. So they go through this rehabilitation process and know what's right for them. But if they're still in the environment that's traumatic or harmful, it can cause still the same effects that it did previously. So how are you able to lead someone to change their environment?
I ask them, so when your buddy phones you up and says, I got a flap of cocaine, do you want to party? I say, what happens next? Right? And they say, oh, we get together and we, snort cocaine. And you say, well, and I say, well, how do you feel after that? What happens next? And I help them to realize the impact on them, right? And when we're talking about, alternate ways of dealing with their negative emotion, we talk about who, are there people in their environment that are, fairly emotionally healthy that they can talk to if they're scared or angry or, have other negative emotions? And they will list emotionally healthy people. They never, ever, ever list other people's substance abuse problems, right? Because as long as you're actively using substances, you cannot be emotionally present. You have to be abstaining from the substances in order to be emotionally present. Because otherwise, your mind is just occupied with, how do I acquire the substances? When can I use it? How do I pay for it? Or you're filled with guilt and shame for having just used the substance. You're not emotionally present, right? And so I'll dialogue with people. And it's interesting because I've had, as I work with clients, they'll recognize, what, these people, they were friends. I thought they were friends in the past, but all they do is bring me down because all they want to do is drink, and they pressure me to drink. And I don't want that in my life. And so instead of me saying, you have to cut them out, I help the person with substance abuse problems to realize, does this person contribute to your emotional health? Do they foster your sobriety? Are they somebody that you can emotionally connect with if you're in psychological distress? What are they modeling for you? And as a result of that, they realize, wow, I need a whole new set of people to hang out with. People that actually are going to be friends, that if I phone them up and say, man, I'm having really bad flashbacks from my PTSD, they say, hey, let's go to the driving range, hit some golf balls and hang out, have coffee, right? Rather than, dude, let's go to the bar. And so I guide them in that process so they realize I fundamentally need to change the social environment to support my sobriety and my mental health.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. It's truly commendable the way that you're able to bring people to lead them to understand the answers for themselves. It definitely provides a great perspective and allows them to learn how to work through these obstacles and these challenges that they may face throughout their time. Because I think the biggest thing, the biggest fundamental that you can learn through therapy is to learn how to do it on your own. When you're in the environment where you're faced head on with a challenge or an obstacle that you may have worked through with, your therapist, that offers you the availability to understand the perspective, know and understand what's best for you, and learn to not result back to some of the mistakes that you've made previously. I think it's so important to allow people to understand, because if you just give them the answers when they see these obstacles, again, they may not necessarily know and remember why that's so important for them. So that's truly commendable, the way that you work with your clients and offer that insight. It's truly commendable to hear, and I hope everyone listening seeks out a mental health professional such as yourself, using these measurable tasks and these self-reflective questions to bring people the awareness of what's most important for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Before I ask my last question, I do want to just offer my gratitude for you being here, for offering your time. It was really such a pleasure just to dive deep into a little bit of what, you're working within and the insights that you have throughout the mental health field, because it's definitely a lot of information that I think not many are talking about or even aware of. So it's awesome that we were able to connect and share a little bit of insight of what you're doing today. And we'll definitely have many opportunities within the future to continue sharing what you're doing and how we can continue to, change the mental health field and bring about a positive light for those that are facing a lot of the psychological injuries today, because it is affecting not only people within their own mental health, but within having a substance abuse problem, within having, any type of social, emotional, physical health, condition that causes a big change within their life. So it's really been a pleasure thus far speaking with you, Eric, and it's been so great learning more about what you've done today. And definitely, I really look forward to what you're going to be doing within the future and how we can continue to collaborate on such a positive message. So for my last question, I love to ask my guests this, and it's one that speaks about really to categorize what you've been doing throughout the past year or two. So it's wanting you to imagine that you're writing a book about your life, and each chapter is going to be, say, a phase within your life. So it could be, an experience, a transition, a lesson that you've been able to uncover. And what I want to ask you is, throughout the past year or two, what would the chapter be called, and why would it be called such? And it can be related to a lesson, an experience, transition that you've been going through, or maybe just some, new activity or light that you've been able to enjoy, and, something that you'd like to leave the audience with at this time.
Sure. I'm very glad, first of all, very glad that you found the psychological injury model helpful. And because my overriding desire, my goal, what I want to do with my life, is to get everybody to be thinking about and talking about their psychological injuries, and to have no more shame about it than if they talk about their physical injuries, right? Like if somebody says, yeah, I was out mountain biking and I shattered my femur, they don't have all this guilt and, oh, I shattered my femur, I'm a bad, weak, crazy person. They don't do that. It's a physical injury. They don't feel shame about having a shattered femur from mountain biking, right? And I want people to be able to talk about their psychological injuries with the same kind of lack of shame. To say, when I was 7 years old, I was emotionally abused. I didn't choose it. I didn't want it. It was put on me. And I've spent, an awful lot of time and energy learning to shift my view of myself from total stinking loser to a person who's got real worth and who's putting effort into helping the lives of others. And I want them to talk about that without feeling all this shame. So that's my life goal, that we're able to talk about our psychological injuries with the same nonchalance with which we talk about our physical injuries. And so over the past year, it's been the realization that psychological injuries are the single biggest cause, and that therapy is the optimal way to treat them. Oh, incidentally, I'm not saying people should never ever take pills or they should abruptly stop their pills. Please, if you're listening, don't abruptly stop your pills. It can have nasty withdrawal effects. And the pills are helpful in very specific instances. Like if people are very suicidal, the pills can help. But the core point is psychological injuries are the single biggest cause. And that if we just recognize we weren't at fault. No 9-year-old kid walks up to her uncle and says, hey, can you fondle my private parts? You weren't at fault, right? You didn't ask for this. And your uncle didn't ask you. He used his much bigger physical power and his fear and your naivety against you. And it wasn't your fault any more than if your brakes fail while you're mountain biking and you shatter your femur, right? Your brakes went out. That's why you broke your leg. Your uncle used his superior physical power and positional power to exploit you. It's not fundamentally your fault. You don't have to feel ashamed about it. And that's the legacy that I'm delighted that you want to participate in sharing with the public, so that they would understand I'm not bad, weak, or crazy because I have a psychological injury. it occurred to me. So I work with lots of police officers. They're not bad or crazy for having post-traumatic stress disorder. They get called to homicides, for crying out loud. That's going to have a huge psychological injury. And that they should feel the same nonchalance about saying, yeah, I got PTSD. I was called to this double homicide, and now I'm having flashbacks. I have to go for treatment to my psychologist. I'm working on my relaxation techniques, you know, with the same nonchalance as, yeah, I shattered my femur. I've got to go to physio and strengthen my leg. So that's the ultimate goal of the change that I think so many people would benefit from in society. And it literally has life and death consequences. Police officers are anywhere from 2 to 3 times more likely to die of suicide than to die in the line of duty. And, you know, it's safer to be out arresting criminals, to be on the job, than to be at home for a police officer. Because the psychological injuries are so severe, the PTSD really drives up the suicidality. And so one of the things I'd like to change is that if police officers are recognized, wow, you know, I'm psychologically injured on the job, and, you know, it's not surprising. I'm exposed to lots of terrible things all day long. I can get treatment, doesn't mean I'm crazy. Then that would save the lives of police officers. It would restore mothers and fathers. It would keep mothers and fathers there for their children. It would keep marriages together. And instead of thinking that they're fundamentally flawed or weak. So that's what I'm looking for the future, is that whenever we talk about mental health, now it's fundamentally about, well, what was your psychological injury? How's it shaping your life? You know, how can you and I work together to help you recover? What steps have you taken so far? And then as we do that, that builds a society of much more emotionally healthy people.
Thank you for that, Eric. I really appreciate that. And I'm so excited to do anything and, you know, my part in order to continue to push that message, because I truly do believe in that wholeheartedly. When I heard about what you were doing and the message that you were pushing, I was blown away, and I was so happy to be able to connect and understand more about your views and what you're doing today. I think it's so commendable that you're trying to push this message, because it's something that will change millions of lives, I think, throughout our world, because it's a topic that is affecting so many people today. And it's something that I believe that many people can gain valuable insight from and learn how to, you know, speak about the challenges that they face and speak about it wholeheartedly, openly, with anyone, to, you know, offer benefits to not only themselves, but to the people around them. Because once you start sharing your story, people become more comfortable in order to share theirs. And it's kind of just that domino effect throughout everybody. So hopefully, as we start this conversation, we can continue to push this message throughout everyone that is listening, and they can continue to do that within their communities. And hopefully we'll see a community and a society that mental injuries, psychological injuries, will be viewed the same as a physical injury, and they will be shared and spoken about and accepted the same throughout all of society. I really would just love to thank you for being here today, spending the time with me. It really was a pleasure to speak more about the psychological injury model and, you know, how you're evaluating people today, how you're leading others to such a more, you know, prosperous and healthy lifestyle. It's truly such a great honor to be able to share your message and share what you're doing today. So I just really would love to thank you, Eric, and it was such a pleasure to have you on the Mental Insights podcast.
You're extremely welcome. And I would encourage your listeners, send in questions. And then, Brendan, I'd be delighted to do follow-up podcasts with you, because I know that this is just the beginning of a dialogue, right? If we're going to bring this shift in society, then we need to hear what society is wondering about, is curious about. And so I'd encourage your listeners, send Brendan your questions. We'll collate them. We can do further podcasts. And then also encourage your listeners, go to psychologicalinjuryindex.com, download the Psychological Injury Index, fill it in. That'll help you to map out your psychological injuries. And that document can then be your roadmap for, okay, now that I know what's happened to me, how do I seek out the healing that'll be meaningful for me? So I was really honored to be on your podcast, Brendan, and look forward to continuing to collaborate with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. You heard it from him. Send any questions that you have to myself. Let us know what you're curious about in terms of what Eric has spoken about throughout this interview, and look at some of the work that he's doing. The Psychological Injury Index will have all the links towards his work below in the show notes, and you'll be able to get in touch with Eric as well if you have some pertinent questions towards him, or if you just have some questions for us for a future podcast episode. So thank you again, Eric. It was such a pleasure to have you on for episode number 23 of the Mental Insights podcast.